Hey guys, welcome to August Q&A. Now guys, we'll start off with what's new here at Ozzie Reviews. First things first, as you can see around me, it's wet yet again. So my advice to those of you who live in drought-stricken areas, just plan a Q&A video each month and guarantee you it will rain. So, all right, enough of the silliness here guys, but it does seem to be a bit true because the last, I don't know how many Q&As I've done, it's always raining or just rained. It's just, yeah, anyhow, that's the way it is. So let's start off with what's new here at Ozzie Reviews. Now, we've had a fair bit of coverage with the PTA hold-ups here in Queensland. So yeah, unfortunately, that's put a hold on some gear for me. But I have got a few more ammo reviews coming up. They seem to be quite popular. I know at this stage it's been mainly in like 22 Magnum. However, I'm going to look at different calibers and stuff. But it really gets the conversation going with how you found a particular ammunition or even other ammunition to run through, you know, your firearms. So that's been pretty good. One thing I will talk about, guys, is price hikes. There seems to be continual price hikes there with ammunition. It's not just ammunition, I guess, it's across the board. Things are going up. As I keep saying to people, get what you can while you can, especially if it's ammunition. You store it correctly, it's really not going to go off, and you're locking it in at a cheaper price than what you're going to be paying in another 6 months or a year or maybe 2 years' time. So, you know, definitely get what you can while you can would be my advice on that. So let's start off this month's Q&A. The first question I got here is from Ben. He says, "Hey Ozzie, I love your work. Do you know anyone that makes a stock to suit a Browning T-bolt rifle?" Yeah, I do, mate. Boyd's over in the US, they do stocks, I believe, for the Browning T-bolt. You could have a look here in Australia. I know there's some importers or dealers that you know, sell Boyd stuff here, but if you couldn't find one, you know, for your rifle, then I believe you can still order from Boyd's from the US there. So check it out and see what you know, I guess options are there. I don't know whether you want a synthetic or a you know, or a wooden stock. However, look at Boyd's. That's going to be a good starting place for you. Next question I got here is from Vaughan. He says, "G'day mate, can you tell us more about the hearing protection you use or review it?" Mate, I'm assuming you're talking about the CENS digital that I use, so basically the plugs with the electronic feature in them. So I've reviewed 2 models of them that I've had. So just do a search on aussiereviews.com.au, or you can actually just go to YouTube and search there. Just do Ozzie Reviews hearing protection and it'll come straight up. Next question I got here is from Stacey, and he says, "G'day Ozzie, I'm just wondering your thoughts on barrel length. All of my rifles are for hunting and have between a 20 and 24 inch barrel. They're all in the same identical aluminium stocks. I'm looking at having them cut down to about 18 inches for portability, maneuverability, and the slightest reduction in weight. What cons would outweigh these pros? I'm currently looking in calibers 223, 243, 308, etc. Okay, it's an interesting one. This, I find it's a balance. So for hunting, I mean, you don't want a really heavy rifle, and I completely understand why you'd want to cut that barrel length down for those reasons that you're talking about. The one con with doing that, apart from losing slight speed, okay, so your feet per second is going to be reduced, but is the noise. Okay, so for example, even a 223. So you shoot, say, a 23, 24 inch barrel 223, and then shoot, for example, like a, what can we look at? Maybe like a, you know, one of the Ruger ranch models in 223, or, you know, if you're looking at like a Remington 7615, you know, with that shortened barrel. I tell you what, the blast comparison is quite significant. So that's going to be the real, I guess, con when you're looking at that. As for the reduction in feet per second, I don't really see that as a problem because you're talking about hunting here. You're not talking about long range target shooting where every extra little bit of feet per second, you know, gives you that advantage. With hunting, for example, mate, I mean, to me, 75 to 125 yards is you know, your usual hunting distance. Even if you're looking out at 200, that's still a fair shot. And in those calibers, you're really not going to notice the difference by dropping down from, say, you know, 24 inches down to 18 inches. Because usually, depending on the caliber, roughly per inch, you're looking at around about 20 feet per second loss. Okay, so that's like on average. So say, for example, you were to lose, say, 100 feet a second, you know, out of your 223. Like, is that going to matter? Like, I don't think it's going to matter at all. You'll be just fine, and the advantage obviously is what you said there. It's just going to be just more versatile out in the field, and obviously a bit lighter for you. Next question I got here is from Will, and he says, "Hi Ozzie, I'm interested to hear your suggestions on a suitable caliber for larger deer and heavy pigs that's easy on recoil, as my partner is very light framed and doesn't like shooting the 30-06 or 300 Win Mag that I've got. I'm looking at spending about $2,500 on a package and leaning towards a Tikka T3X Lite in 7mm 08 or 25-06, but have not used either caliber before. Looking at just putting the Leupold VX Freedom 3 to 9x40 on top, as this won't be used any more than about 30 shots a year." Okay, so it will depend, mate, on where you live. Okay, and why I say that is because some states actually have minimum legal requirements there for calibers when it comes to shooting deer. So New South Wales, I believe is 243, I believe it's 270 in Victoria. Here in Queensland, they're a feral pest, so there are no actual legal requirements other than obviously be ethical. You're not going to go out there with a 22 and do it. So depending on where you are, and why I say that is because, you know, if you are in those states where those minimum requirements are, then you're definitely going to be wanting to look at the 7mm 08 over the 25-06, because even though 25-06 is a brilliant caliber, and you can easily take deer with that caliber in my view, legally it's got to be bigger in those states. So if that's the case, well, you've got to go with 7mm 08. If you don't have any requirements there, I would strongly look at 6.5, and I don't care even if it's 6.5 by 55, the Swedish Mauser, or 6.5 Creedmoor. You know, brilliant calibers, a lot lighter on the shoulder there, especially for people who are recoil sensitive, as opposed to, like, you know, 308, like you're saying, you know, 300 Win Mag, etc. So I'd look at that. Even 243. You know, 243 using 100 grain Sierra Game King, I'd have no problem in shooting deer with the correct shot placement, you know, with that. Also large pigs, I've seen them just drop like no tomorrow with that combination in a 243. So yeah, I would look at that sort of thing. But if you have those legislative requirements, obviously you'll have no other choice but to go like 7mm 08. There's a little bit... there is less recoil, put it that way, with 7mm 08. There definitely is, compared to like 30-06 or 300 Win Mag, massive difference. However, if your partner is still recoil sensitive, you know, if you got her behind, say, a 243, you know, maybe that would be a lot more comfortable. But you've got to keep in mind, are you living in an area with those legislative requirements on minimum caliber size? Next question I got here is from Simon. He says, "Hi Ozzie, can you give us a rundown on the type of cattle you've got? Do you breed them, how long you keep them, and how much you usually make on them? I'm not interested in doing it myself, but just very interested to know." Okay, mate, it depends. Now, for me, I mean, I like Santa Gertrudis and Droughtmaster breeds of beef cattle, so that's what I do, beef cattle farming. So yeah, I find those breeds a really good breed, nice and hardy, and suitable for my terrain and what I've got here on you know, my farm. So if you breed them, obviously there's a bit more work involved in that, because you've got to basically you know, dehorn them, nut them, you know, obviously if they're a male. Then you've got branding, etc. to do, obviously when they're young, when they're calves. So a little bit more work there, but obviously you can make more money because you've bred them yourself, and it's not as much money investment in doing that as what there is if you're just buying and selling. So what I mean by buying and selling is you go buy a weaner, so in other words, you know, a little bit bigger than a calf that's been weaned from its mother, and it's right to just eat out in the paddock. It doesn't require milk from its mum to survive. We used to be able to get them only a couple of years ago for between sort of $500 and $700, about 2 years ago. Now, I mean, it's just out of control. Like, $1,800 for the same, weaners. I mean, you just look at it and go, wow, where's it going? But so yeah, it's one of those, I guess, industries where it fluctuates. Like at the moment, yeah, we've got great cattle prices for producers, but then in another year's time, that may drop right down. Where you're not making a lot of money at all. So it really depends on how you do it. The idea behind it though is obviously, say for example, you've got a calf or you've got a weaner, well, you're going to hang on to it for a couple of years just till it grows, so that you can obviously have it suitable for selling, for meat consumption. So yeah, it just depends, mate. It depends on how many head of cattle that you turn over per year. So if you're just buying and selling and say, for example, you only make a couple $100 per head, well, you need to turn over enough head per year to make yourself a profitable, amount of money. If you're breeding, well, obviously you'll have to take in the costs there of having your bull and etc. And different treatments there. But obviously the margin for making more money is better because you're not paying someone else for that calf, so to speak. You've bred it yourself. So yeah, it just depends on what combination you want to go with your capabilities, the capability of the property you're on. And what I mean by the capability is there good water, is there good feed? There's a lot to consider there, but in general, you've just got to tailor it to your circumstances. Next question I got here is from Michael, and he says, hi Ozzie, I'm just looking for a scope recommendation for my Ruger American Compact in 223. Okay, Mike, I'm assuming you don't want to spend a lot of money. Most people who jump into Rugers, love the simplicity of them and the price point. So I wouldn't imagine you want to put a $3,000 Schmidt & Bender on it, even though that'd be nice. So mate, running with a budget, I would honestly say to you, go for the Leupold VX Freedom 3 to 9x40. I know a lot of people raise, them even in this Q&A, but I've used them. I've had no issues with them. They're at a price point, yeah, but they work. So, I'd recommend that for that setup because I've used very similar before on Ruger American centerfire reviews that I've done, and yeah, zero problems for what that purpose of that firearm is. Next question I got here is from Alex, and he says, hey Ozzie, I'm running a Sauer 100 XT in 223 and I love it. I've got a Leupold VX Freedom 3 to 9x40 scope. I'm laughing because we only just answered this in the previous question. And I'm looking to upgrade. What would be your pick on a budget of no more than $1,100? Thanks, mate. I'm a long-time follower of your channel and only a recent Patreon supporter. I couldn't believe how affordable it is. Keep up the great work. Well, Alex, thanks very much, mate. And like I say to people, I can't answer questions all day, every day for free. So Patreon is a way for me to get something back in return for the time that I give you guys. And like you say, it's from $1 a month. So, some people still don't want to pay that. That's fine, but I won't be answering their questions. That's the bottom line. So to answer your question in general there, Alex, honestly, mate, if you want to go up from that, because the VX Freedom is a very budget line, within the Leupold brand. I really like the Leupold VX3i. I find that just that nice step up, from the Freedom. Even the turrets, they just feel that bit more solid and nicer. You've got the VX3 HD now. You can have a look at that as well, and that's all going to keep you under that price point of what your budget is there of under $1,100. You can look at other brands too, mate, but honestly I go to Leupold because it just works, and it's just this benchmark of usually where I'll start on a budget to a medium price setup. So yeah, have a look at them and I'm sure you'll be pretty happy. Next question I got here is from Paul, although it's more just a comment. He says, hey Ozzie, I just wanted to thank you for all the time and effort you put in and the valuable information you give and fighting for our gun rights. Well, Paul, look, I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me, and it certainly takes a lot of my own time in doing all this, but I am hoping it is for a purpose in the long term, so thank you once again. Next question I got here is from Joshua, and he says, hey Ozzie, I'm just wondering how your CENS digital earplugs go working around machinery like dozers, etc.? Do they block out the constant loud noise, or would it be better just to switch them off? Yeah, it would be better to switch them off, mate. What I've found is when operating machinery, and if I've got them in, it interferes too much with it blocking it out if the electronics are turned on. So yeah, you're better off just switching them off. And then obviously they're just going to work like any other earplug would. Next question I got here is from Darren. He says, hi Ozzie, is there any movement on suppressors becoming legal or acceptable if you have hearing loss? I'm asking for any states here in Australia. Well, I believe that places like New South Wales, Victoria, do have the options there for suppressors. Here in Queensland, mate, it's still an uphill struggle, although the fight is continuously going on with that. I know Shooters Union have been pushing very, very hard, even up into the recent weeks, to have suppressors legalised. Because currently here in Queensland, most people don't know, excuse me, they're in with Category R weapons. Okay, so Category R weapons here in Queensland are grenades, grenade launchers, full auto machine guns, all that sort of stuff. Most people are going, really? Suppressors in with that? Yeah, they are. So, it is sort of funny when you compare it to places like New Zealand. Even after all their laws and everything over there that they've had changed recently, you can still freely access suppressors. So you look at most places in Europe where it's almost neighbourly to have them. Once again, freely access them as well, if you're a licensed shooter. So I believe the same should be here personally. As for hearing loss, now this is the thing with suppressors. Like, if you're shooting high velocity ammunition, so if you're shooting really anything from centerfire, minimum like centerfire calibers like 223 right up, to the larger centerfire calibers like 30-06, etc., etc. If you're using a suppressor there, you're not going to get rid of that supersonic crack as the sound barrier is broken. It's just impossible to get rid of that because it's physics. However, it does get rid of or minimize that blast that goes with it. So a lot of the time you still need to have hearing protection on. However, you minimize that noise level. So obviously long term, it's going to be looking after your hearing a lot more than, if you don't have a suppressor there. So under those circumstances, I'm not sure if you can currently get them down south for that reason. There seems to be a benchmark here in Australia that the acceptable use is for occupational, because obviously workplace health and safety comes into that. So in other words, if you're a feral pest controller, a farmer, or you have some other occupation, like for example, roo culling, something where you have a business there and you have an occupational requirement and to adhere to workplace health and safety laws, I believe in some circumstances you can get it. Not here in Queensland though currently. So yeah, the fight continues on is the short answer, mate. Next question I got here is from Matt, and he says, hi Ozzie, as a new shooter with a 223, I was wondering if you could give me some tips on how to deal with recoil and learning to keep the scope on target, as my bipod shifts over an inch every time I squeeze the shot off in my 223. I think my posture needs some work. Well, mate, it's very hard to sort of make comment without sort of, being in front of you and watching you shoot. However, I will give you these tips. One of the biggest things, well, first of all, just understand that when shooting a lot of centerfires there will be movement. And it's very, very hard, especially with heavier calibers, to stay on target. A lot of people, end up buying like a muzzle brake, but I don't like them personally because the noise is horrendous when you're using muzzle brakes, even on 223. So I don't like that, so I just go without. However, like you say, yep, posture does come into it, but when you shoot, there will be that movement. Unless you are basically against a brick wall and everything's all secured and everything like that, you're still going to have that movement, if you get what I'm saying. You can minimize it very much so with your trigger control. And like I said, I haven't watched you shoot, but an experiment you can run is next time you go out to the range, okay, put a few rounds in your magazine there, get someone that you're going there with, or even the range officer, at some point in that magazine to put a snap cap in there. So in other words, it's inert. it's an inert round, okay? There's no explosive in it, no primer, there's no gunpowder, nothing like that, okay? So why I say to do that is because, and for you to not have knowledge with it, is so that when you're shooting, so you're out and you say, for example, it's the second round there, but you don't know it is. So you fire the first round, you go, oh geez, I've got this movement. Then you fire the second round, which is actually a snap cap, and then you'll be able to see whether you snap on that trigger, okay? Because if you snap at a firearm trigger, it doesn't matter whether it's a pistol or whether it's a rifle, there will be movement on that muzzle, you'll see it, okay? And that's what creates more movement in general, and you can minimize your overall control of the firearm through your trigger control. It's very important to learn to do, and it's not easy to master. I mean, I still slip into it sometimes where I may just snap at the trigger. You know, we all do. But yeah, if you can just squeeze that trigger constantly and not have any movement of that muzzle, that's the way to go. So you could even practice it at home with snap caps only, obviously, not with live ammunition. And you could just use snap caps in general and just practice, you know, like when you dry fire. That's another thing that is good to get that trigger control happening. So that's the only tips that I can pretty much give you without seeing how you shoot. Next question I got here is from Jack, and he says, hey Ozzie, just wondering what positives you see in the firearms and shooting community here in Australia. Well, mate, there's a lot of positives. I mean, a lot of negatives, yes, but we're not talking about that as your question, you know, relates to. So positives, I think, well, for example, one of the positives that we've had just in the last few days is the movement or getting movement on permit to acquires being issued here in Queensland. We've had people waiting months and not even getting a permit to acquire, which is very frustrating because at the end of the day, we didn't ask for these laws and they're being forced upon us and we're paying for it, but what do we get in return? So there's a lot of frustration there. The Shooters Union, Graham Park, along with Jade Cleaver acting as the president of the Dealers Association, Robbie Catter from Catter Party, Mick D'Amato, and Tony Perrott, I think, was their third politician, that all had a meeting at Parliament House, met with the police minister and actually got some traction on it and, you know, starting to get these permits issued again. So, you know, that's a positive. We've got some really good representation here in Australia. Yeah, there's room for improvement, but a lot of these guys, like for example, like Graham Park is a volunteer, you know, like, and I'm thinking to myself, like, how many other guys would volunteer their time to fight so much for gun rights? I know myself, you know, like you give up so much time to do like videos and education and stuff like that. Sometimes you do think to yourself, well, geez, is it worth it? You know, but it's not about a monetary value. It's about what you're doing for the shooting community. So I think there's a lot of positives like that here in Australia. Another thing that I think is very positive is also manufacturers here in Australia stepping up to market demands. It's in, I guess, return for the import laws here. So what I mean by that is, for example, you can't import like a Troy pump action AR, right? Even though it's a pump action, it will get categorized on cosmetic appearance as a Cat D firearm for the purpose of import. So prohibited for 99.9% of Australian shooters. So a lot of people have gone, well, geez, you know, I'd like to have a manually operated AR, so why can't I have one? So that's where you see like the likes of Wedgetail Industries, Warwick Firearms, Oceana Precision, you know, who have stepped up to the mark to make a straight pull AR type firearm. You see, so that's also a positive. You see people stepping up to the mark, also like Victor Precision. Look at 15 and 25 round magazines for the Ruger American, prohibited import. So you can legally have them in the various states and territories in the different capacities, but you can't import them over 10 rounds. So we've got Victor Precision who's stood up to the plate to go, hey, we're going to put the time, money and effort into manufacturing these here in Australia. So I think we've got a very healthy industry here and definitely a lot of capability to bring great products to us like that. I think probably finally one of the biggest things that's a positive, mate, would be the fact that for the majority we have a lot of game animals, from feral pigs, you know, foxes, you know, rabbits, hares, deer. And here in Queensland, for example, you don't have any hunting season. Yeah, I know down south they have a duck season, but in general, a lot of these other animals are feral pests, and we're not restricted to hunting seasons like a lot of countries are around the world. So I think that's another really big positive for the shooting industry here in Australia. Not to mention the fact that there's over 1 million of us, so there is a very healthy culture here in Australia, and it's up to all of us to continue that legacy on, in my view. So yeah, mate, to answer your question, I think those are really good positives. Okay guys, that concludes this month's Q&A. As I've said many times before, guys, if you are sending me emails, you're sending me messages, etc., asking me for help, please, I restrict it only to those of you who help me out on Patreon, because otherwise I can't sit there all day just answering questions, and the sheer amount of questions that I get from just the general shooting community, honestly, it'd have to be a full-time job to answer all those questions. So please guys, if you want your questions answered, it doesn't even have to be on a Q&A video. If you're a Patreon member, which you can do from just $1 a month, that's it, $1 single a month, you can ask me as many questions as you want. All right guys, we'll leave the Q&A at that, so we'll catch you on the next review.